Hello friends, my name is Marlena and today I have part 6 of my tour slash unhaul. Is it 6? I don't know. I don't know why I started counting out loud in these videos. I was bound to forget. Basically, I got my shelves. My brother-in-law came over and he helped me put it all together and arrange everything, but it kind of sped up my timeline. Like I didn't do this fast enough. So I ended up having to just take down all of the books that were on my cases as they existed, and they're in piles all over my apartment. So I put all of the ones that I haven't talked to you about here in my room. So I separated them so I knew which ones I still needed to get through. And I mean, I wish I could get through all of these in one video. I don't know that that's quite possible, but let's go and do as many as we can. Let's do this. I kind of tried to order them so I knew how they were originally set up on the shelves and I could take you through them kind of more or less in that order, but I didn't really do a good job organizing, and now I just have these stacks of books. So I'm sorry. I know that I was taking you through my shelves in order, but like I said, everything kind of sped up on me and I'm just gonna start going through piles of books. First I have We Are Okay by Nina LaCour. I got this from Sam from Thoughts on Tomes. She brought a bunch of books to unhaul to a Y'all Fest one year, and I was looking through and I don't know why this just grabbed my attention. When I asked her about it, she said she really liked it, but like she wasn't ever gonna read it again. It wasn't something that she wanted to keep necessarily, but it was so short and like the cover is very appealing, and I've always wanted to read a book by Nina LaCour. Well, of course, I brought this home and never read it, but I am gonna keep it because it is short and I feel like if I just sat down, I could probably get through it in one sitting, so this is going on my TBR. Next, I have Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur. This is a collection of modern poetry, and I am very hit and miss with modern poetry. I think that it's just like something ingrained in me about like how I learned to read and dissect poetry, that I enjoy something that is a little bit meatier and that there is like something to pick apart and a lot of imagery and sort of like rhythm to the poem, where modern poetry tends to be more economical and very short. So sometimes that works for me when it is like a few lines that capture something beautifully and with that sort of economy, and sometimes it's just like, dude, that was a sentence and like not even like a very deep or meaningful one. So that was more or less how I felt about the poetry in here. Some of it was just beautiful and very haunting and personal. There are heavy topics discussed in this, and some of it I was like, I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. Next I have Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. Pretty early on in my channel, I went through a Neil Gaiman phase. I had never read any Neil Gaiman, so I started reading a bunch of his work. I haven't actually finished going through all of it, and Neverwhere is one that I have not read yet. This is still on my TBR for sure. Next I have Shrill Notes from a Loud Woman by Lindy West. This is nonfiction. It's a collection of essays by Lindy. I find West really funny, and I enjoy the way that she looks at certain topics and topics that I'm very interested in, like internet culture and media and body positivity and body shaming and things of that nature. But she does it in this way that she both ties like personal things to it, but then looks at these larger ideas and adds humor to all of that. It is very much my style. I enjoyed this and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Next, Another Brooklyn by Jacqueline Woodson. And this was, I remember, very difficult for me to rate because the writing in this is very beautiful, and it is very like lyrical and musical, but it's so short, and I felt like it was over before I really had a sense of what even was happening narratively in this book. It does deal with some heavier topics in a very lovely and heartbreaking way. So I was like impressed with the writing, which is no surprise because Woodson, but I was also like left hanging. So ultimately I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars, but it is one that I feel like I would reread, and if I reread it, I would appreciate more. So I'm keeping this. Next I have Illuminae by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. I started this and DNF'd it twice, and then the third time that I gave it a try, I made my way through it, and it is very readable once you kind of get past that initial hump. The format itself just makes it super easy to read and very engaging. I don't think that I have very strong feelings for any of the characters except for maybe the AI, and if you like pressed me about what the plot was of this, I don't remember it very clearly. So it was enjoyable once I got into it, but not very memorable to me. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars and I'm keeping it. A Spool of Blue Thread by Ann Tyler. I read this because it was long listed for the Man Booker, and it's always my intent to read as many of those as I can. Was much better about it before than I currently am, but I really loved this, and I just looked it up on Goodreads because I had a feeling that it wasn't like universally loved, and it's got like a 3.5 rating on Goodreads, and I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. But I very much understand why it's not for everybody, because this is such a like quiet and moving story, and I think for half of it I was enjoying the writing, but I was kind of like whatever about the characters. But then in the second half and in retrospect, I just really appreciated the way that this story moves through history and how layered it was, and the writing and the composition was just something that left like an impression on me. So yes, 5 out of 5 stars, and I'm keeping this. Next I have Alexander Hamilton by Ron Cerneau, which is of course the inspiration for Hamilton. I actually picked this up after I had seen Hamilton, and reading it was really interesting because you almost felt like getting the source material, you know, history or whatever, but you saw the moments in this specific biography that you could imagine Lin-Manuel Miranda like picking up on and really drawing from for the musical. So this is a chunker. It took me a while to get through, but overall I very much enjoyed it. There is an obvious pro-Hamilton bias in there, but I thought that Cerneau was really open and upfront and fair about his bias. Ultimately, through reading it, like I was engaged and I was like too invested in the politics of the past. Like it was stressing me out even though it already happened. So I gave this 5 out of 5 stars when I read it, and I am keeping it. Next I have The Life She Wants by Robin Carr. I don't remember how I received this. I want to say it may have been from the publisher, but I don't know, that doesn't sound exactly right. Never read it and I can't remember what it's about, so I'm unhauling it. Next I have the Iliad and the Odyssey, and you can see I got it at a bargain price from Barnes & Noble. And so I have read the Odyssey. I've never read the Iliad, and I wanted a copy of the Odyssey, and this one came together, so I'm keeping this. Next I have The Crane Wife by Patrick Ness. This is based on a Japanese folktale, and it basically looks at a father-daughter relationship. The main character in this is almost like a tropey, very nice guy kind of thing, but I really liked the relationship between him and his daughter and the way it looked at a father-daughter relationship and explored themes of forgiveness and things of that nature. I also enjoy Patrick Ness's writing, and I thought it was very magical and beautiful in here. So the story itself wasn't my favorite of his, but there were themes I enjoyed and writing I enjoyed, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, and I'm keeping it. A Study in Charlotte by Brittany Cavallaro. So this is like a YA Sherlock Holmes retelling, and I originally read it and gave it like 3 out of 5 stars, and then I put it aside and never kept on in the series. So I picked it back up because I wanted to continue in the series. So I reread this and I was like, I don't think I liked it that much. And then I read the second book and I hated the second book like a lot. Part of me still entertains the idea of finishing off the series, because mostly because this is so well liked in BookTube that I'm like, what is everybody else reading, or does it get better? And really the thing that gets my curiosity the most is the relationship between the two main characters. I think that is so gross, honestly. And so the fact that people ship it, like, I'm not trying to be judgmental to people who like it. I'm genuinely curious about how it develops, if it becomes something that I can be like, oh, I understand why people ship that. Because in the second book, in this book it's like bad, and in the second book it gets so much worse that it's almost like beyond me. If I do end up continuing, it will be through a library. There's really no reason for me to keep this, so I'm going to unhaul it. Next I have A Grief Observed by C.S. Lewis, which I have read before. I probably gave this 5 out of 5 stars. For somebody like me that likes to read about grief, like this is it. And he writes so lovingly about his wife. So it is C.S. Lewis, so that's always like religiously tinged, but I love C.S. Lewis's writing, and this is no exception, so I'm keeping it. Next I have The Friend Zone by Abby Jimenez. I bought this basically to have as reading during a hurricane, because, you know, if the lights go out, then I wanted like a physical book, and I wasn't with my collection. I was staying with my parents because I close enough to the beach that I have to evacuate. So I ended up just buying this because I forgot to bring a book with me, and then I never read it, and I made the mistake of either talking to like Jess and my Miami girls about this, or reading a review, something like that, and the reviews talked about how this doesn't handle infertility very well, or there's like an aspect of it that can be seen kind of as problematic. So that put me off of reading it. Looking at it now, I am still kind of curious about it. So I think I'm going to keep this and put it on my TBR. Next I have The New Moon's Arm by Nalo Hopkinson. I bought this at NerdCon Stories because Hopkinson was just A+ on panels that weekend. To this day I have not read anything by Nalo Hopkinson, which seems like such a failing, I guess, because I was so impressed by her and just the way that she expressed herself about storytelling and writing. So I think I'll hold on to this for now and put it on my TBR. The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros, which I have talked about on this channel before, because this is one of the first books that I ever read that I saw myself reflected in, even though the main character and I don't share the same exact background. And so that is something I get very emotional talking about, but yes, I am keeping this. The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis, which I have read. This is basically a Christian-based look at why is there pain and suffering in the world if we believe in a benevolent God. So Lewis answers that question from his point of view. Obviously not something I would recommend if you were not interested in Christianity or in theological looks at things of that nature. This is very dense at times, but it is obviously a work that I get something out of, so I am keeping this. St. Lucy's Home for Girls Raised by Wolves by Karen Russell. This is a collection of short stories by Karen Russell, and they're just as weird and I like them just as much. I think I gave this 4 or 5 out of 5 stars and I'm keeping this. Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. I don't think I've read this one. I think I read 2 others by Gillian Flynn. I saw the HBO adaptation and I kept talking to my coworkers, my ex-coworkers about it, and so one of them actually picked this up to read and we had kind of a book club going on amongst us. But the thing was they were not big readers, but the other 2 would like read the books and then it would get to be my turn and I would never get around to them. They picked books that I wasn't necessarily interested in reading or like at the moment. Again, such a mood reader that it's difficult for me to participate in book clubs anyways, especially with things with soft deadlines. And the thing is that I turned them on to this story because I had just watched the adaptation. So then they were like, well, read the book. And I was like, but why? Like, I already saw the thing. So anyway, the book stayed with me. I no longer work there. I don't talk to them anymore, so I am unhauling this. Next I have Names on a Map and Carry Me Like Water, both by Benjamin Alire Sands. So I read a couple of his works that I really enjoyed and ended up purchasing these because I was like, well, I'll just read my way through his catalog, and promptly did not read my way through his catalog. But I am still interested in reading these and I will keep them on my TBR. Next I have 99% Mine by Sally Thorne, who also wrote The Hating Game. And I feel like there was a good amount of hate for this book when it came out, especially because people enjoyed The Hating Game so much. And I guess I came from the perspective of I thought the Hating Game was good, like it was entertaining. I gave it 3 or 3.5 out of 5 stars, and I gave this the same. I thought that they were pretty on par, and there were things about the main character that I understand people didn't like, but I thought it fit in with her characterization, and calling her annoying for the ways that she was struggling with like her chronic illness and her own like mental and physical health were like uncalled for. So I enjoyed this perfectly fine. I enjoyed The Hating Game perfectly fine. I would probably reread either of those. I just wasn't like blown away by them, but I am keeping this. Next I have Jellicle Road by Marlena Marchetta, and I believe I picked this up specifically on Caitlin from Book Chat's recommendation. I can't remember the context right now, but I have a feeling that she was the one who was like, I think you should read this, and I was like, okay. I think I purchased this also like discounted either at a used bookstore or through Book Outlet. So when I saw it, I was like, oh, I think Caitlin really likes that. I hope it was Caitlin because I've just said her name like 17 times. But somebody talked to me a lot about Jellicle Road and this author, so I picked up a copy. I haven't read it yet, but I still think that I would like to. So this is going on my TBR. I feel like I'm not unhauling enough. Next I have Dear Haiti, Love Elaine, and this is by Micah and Maritza Malit. And I started this and I put it aside and never got back to it. I met Micah and Maritza at BEA 2019, but also they did a signing in Miami, so I've had the opportunity to see them twice. They're both really lovely, and what I've heard about this book is that it is a little slow to get moving and to kind of catch up to the back of the book description of where the main character will be. But I've heard so many things about what a good and interesting contemporary this is that I want to give it another chance, so I'm keeping this. Next I have The Right Swipe by Alicia Rai. I really love this. It's one of my favorite contemporary romances that I've ever read. It was very topical, but I enjoyed that. I like when my romances have like sort of other issues surrounding the main love, and also characters, other characters and side characters and friendships and things that I can also enjoy. And this had all of that, probably to a detriment for other readers who thought that this was too packed with like sort of topical issues, but everything was just really interesting or really relatable to me. So I, like I said, love this and I am keeping it. Next I have I Am Princess X by Cherie Priest, and this is a BEA 2016 acquisition, so I've already talked about at length how that went, and I am unhauling this. Next I have Bone Gap by Laura Ruby, which I love. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars, but it is a very, very strange book. We do have an episode, one of the very first episodes of Snark Squad Pod up about this. I will link that, and I just really, really love this. I just realized that the thing that's like poking out of here is a boarding pass, but not for me. It's Nicole's boarding pass from San Diego to Salt Lake City. So she borrowed this for the podcast. So yeah, I guess she tucked that away in there when she gave it back to me, and I didn't realize until just now, but I'm keeping both the book and the boarding pass. Next I have Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and this is 5 out of 5 stars for me, and I'm keeping it. The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, and I have vague memories of reading this in like late high school, early college. And being like very into certain quotes, like certain of what he said, but like not very into like the whole of this. Am I keeping this? Tentatively, yes. Just, I don't really remember much about it. I don't think I even have it like rated or reviewed. I don't know. I think I'm gonna keep it for now. Next I have The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. So this is a second copy of The Night Circus. I had an original copy that I read from, and I ended up giving it away to a friend because I wanted them to also read it. And then, so I put another copy on my wish list, and I think it was Sam who ended up getting me for like our Secret Santa that year and sent me it. And then once I got it, I realized that I had already purchased myself another copy but did not remember. So I have this copy and another copy. Like, I'm fine with it because I really enjoy this copy and also I love this book, so I'm also keeping this one. Next I have The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins, and this is the original copy that I read. I reread the series this year and I was very, very surprised by how much I still very much enjoyed it, and how much, I mean, I don't even know if it's all what Suzanne Collins did, but the story that she gave us really has like the ability to like read much deeper into it, which is something that I enjoy. We do have a podcast episode about rereading The Hunger Games in 2020, so I will link that. And yeah, I'm keeping this. I would love to buy better copies. This is the only one. I don't even have copies of 2 and 3. I want like a collector's sort of edition of The Hunger Games. Juniper Books has one that is expensive that I want, but for right now we're just gonna keep the one, and you know, maybe one day when I have lots of extra fun money I'll buy better copies. But yes, I'm keeping this. The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. We read this for House Salt Book Club this year, and it is very weird, and I didn't have like the most positive experience reading it, but the conversation and in retrospect, like I really appreciated what Mandel created. I think the like not positive reading experience was more a me thing. Like it was like in the thick of isolation, and just the amount of like attention that this took wasn't like jiving with where I was, but I had to read it. So that was all. Like if I had been able to put this aside and come to it in a better mood, I think I would have experienced the actual reading of it in a better place, but I had a hard deadline. So like I said, in retrospect though, I really appreciated the themes of this and the way that the story is layered, and the way that Mandel did here what she also does in Station 11, and that is connect the story through different people in a sort of long thread. So this was like a 5-star read for me in terms of composition, and a 3-star reading experience, so I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars, and I'm keeping it. Next I have The Poetry Home Repair Manual by Ted Kusher. This was a book that I needed for that poetry class that I took in college, and we went through this together as kind of like a textbook or, you know, a manual, and I have very good memories of reading through this. I've talked about before like sort of my take on having an audience and how you write things for yourself if you intend no audience, like a grocery list versus something that you intend to share with others than is not writing for yourself. And I'm almost certain that that idea comes from Ted Kusher and this book. I've always meant to go back and like peek through it and see what I can kind of glean on a reread, but either way, I just have really good memories of that class. I have multiple of the books that I used for that class, and this was really helpful to me in that time, so I'm keeping it. 36 Questions That Changed My Mind About You by Vicki Grant. This was sent to me by the publisher. They reached out to me and I thought it sounded very interesting at the time, and I have not read it, but I am going to keep it because this was one that was like not unsolicited, that I was like, yeah, I'll read that, and I haven't yet, so I'm gonna keep it and put it on my TBR. Dumplin by Julie Murphy. I have not read this, and did I see the adaptation? I feel like yes, I watched the Netflix adaptation, but I have not read this. And I feel like if I do read this, I might like borrow an audiobook for this. I don't know. This is one that I could be swayed on, but I haven't unhauled anything. So like, is that a good reason to unhaul this? I mean, it is, because comparatively to like other books that I have here, I want to keep this one less than I want to keep other books. So unless you guys tell me, Maddie, no, please, that's wonderful, keep it, you're gonna love it, you're gonna want a copy. This is going on my unhaul pile. Looking for Alaska by John Green. This I read, it was my second John Green book, and it was very much where I was like, these are suspiciously similar, but I did enjoy it when I read it. I think I gave it like 3 or 3.5 out of 5 stars, but also this is part of that like signed collection of books that someone once gifted me, and I'm keeping all of them, so I'm also keeping this one. Head On by John Scalzi, which is a second book or like a companion book to Lock-In by John Scalzi. I really enjoy Scalzi's writing. I've read a bunch from him. This is another author that I've always wanted to read more from. I haven't read the first book though. This was sent to me by the publisher, as well as a paperback copy of Lock-In, I believe, that I have somewhere in here. So like maybe I add both of them to my TBR. I was getting so much better at this, and all of a sudden today I'm like, keep. I also have read like a lot of these, so let's keep going. The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman, which I have read and loved, 5 out of 5 stars, and I would love to reread one day because I got so much. Again, this is another one that you can read really deeply into, so I'm keeping it. Certain Dark Things by Silvia Moreno Garcia. Moreno Garcia is shaping up to be one of my favorite authors, and this is one of her vampire novels. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, but I also found it really immersive, very much better than other certain vampire stories that you might be inclined to read, and I am keeping this. The Witches Are Coming by Lindy West. I also gave this one 5 out of 5 stars, I believe, and I'm keeping it. My Own Devices by Dessa. This is also an essay collection, which I loved so much. Dessa is a recording artist, so she talks a lot about music and being on the road, but also this is her story of falling in love and just like heartbreak, and so being so heartbroken that she also like takes a look at what it means to be heartbroken, like scientifically and like brain chemistry wise. It is such an interesting like collection of ideas. She also goes into depth talking about her family and dedicates an essay to each of the members of her family. I actually listened to this on audiobook, which Dessa reads, and it is so charming, but I loved it so much that I bought a physical copy, so I am keeping this. Everybody Sees the Ants by A.S. King. Do I have 2 copies of this? What is the... I was thinking of Ask the Passengers by A.S. King. So if Everybody Sees the Ants and Ask the Passengers. In my previous video where I talked about this, I decided to keep it on my TBR. So I think I'm going to keep both of these on my TBR. Forgive Me, Leonard Peacock by Matthew Quick. This was in my first book outlet, like huge haul that I did. For whatever reason, I never read it, and I'm not interested at the moment in reading it, so I'm unhauling it. Afterlife by Julia Alvarez, which I talked about recently because I read recently. I ended up giving this like 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I'm keeping it. Next, I have Passage to America by Alyssa Albel and The Drowned Boys by Jessie Milner. These are 2 poetry collections. I believe they are like self-published, and these were 2 that I read for that college poetry class. I enjoyed reading both of these, and there are actually poems in each of these that I still remember very vividly, so I am keeping both of these. The Sun and Her Flowers by Rupi Kaur. I enjoyed this one less than Milk and Honey. Milk and Honey for me was more 4 stars. I think this was 3 stars, but I still will hang on to this. The Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. I've been thinking about this book very recently, partly because I watched a book from Mara from Books Like Whoa and one from Reagan from Peru's project, and both of them mentioned like sort of the extended series that this belongs to, and so it reminded me that I read this first book. I enjoyed it, but I never continued. I actually started the second book and was kind of like lost in the sauce a little bit. I think I waited too long to move on to the second book, but this I enjoyed. I enjoyed meeting the characters, but it reads very heavily like an extended introduction to something. So I want to give this another try, especially because everybody talks about how much better these books get as you go on through the series, and some of the like later series sound like really interesting premise wise, so I do want to continue on with the series. I bought this copy in London, so even if I hadn't read this and hadn't liked it, I would keep it, but I read it, liked it, and it's a souvenir, so it's staying with me. Next, His Bloody Project, which was another Man Booker long list, and I actually started this 2 different times and just felt like I wasn't fully understanding what was happening. I think I'm going to let this go. Vicious by V.E. Schwab. Yes, this is a second copy of a book that I have complicated feelings about. The first copy that I showed you was sent to me by the publisher. This is a copy that I bought myself after I read and liked it. I actually bought this on Book Depository so I could get this version of the cover, and yeah, my feelings are still complicated, but I did overall give this like a 3 or 3.5 out of 5 stars, so it is one that I would keep. Would I necessarily keep 2 copies? Probably not. So maybe I will go back and unhaul the publisher copy and keep this one. Soulless by Gail Carriger, which I have talked about plenty on this channel. This is the copy that I was telling you that is not like the other second book copy that I have. This one's like shorter, which really annoys me, and I need to figure out if it's because they're different editions or if that's just the way that it's going to be. And I also don't own the rest of the books in the series, so that is one that's on kind of my wish list of books to finish collecting. But yes, I love the crap out of this series, especially the first couple of books in the series. I think they're just so fun, and I love like the steampunk paranormal thing that it does, and I think that Carriger's like humor that she infuses into this just by like poking at the tropes of the genre are really a plus, so I am keeping this. Signal to Noise by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. This is the first book of hers that I read, and I think it was her first novel, and I really enjoyed this. The main character is one of those like kind of hard to root for main characters, but this is full of so much music and magic, and the sort of like coming of age portion of it is really interesting because you get it when she's young, but we're also looking at her like into the future, like going through almost like a second coming of age. So I just really enjoyed all of the pieces of the story, and I am keeping this. All the Truth That's in Me by Julie Berry. I talked about having another Julie Berry unread on my shelf because I read this book and I really enjoyed it. I don't often hear people talking about Julie Berry, more now because of a more recent release of hers, Something About War. We're doing great today, but you know, whatever. I only have like vague memories of what the plot is about, but I am holding on to this because it was a book that I read and loved. Deathless by Catherine M. Valenti. Looking at this reminds me that I am halfway through this book for a while now, and I was really enjoying it. I obviously love Valenti's writing, and this is like very like folklore-ish and dark. This is on my TBR to finish up. I'm literally like halfway through this. Like I could probably finish it up in a day, so I just need to do that. A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. I own so much V.E. Schwab for someone who didn't like it, but listen, I read Vicious and I ordered that copy from Book Depository, and then I was in London afterwards and I saw like this matching cover for her newest book, which was A Darker Shade of Magic. I've even got like my Scotland postcards that I bought in here kind of hanging out, so I'm keeping this as a souvenir, even though it's kind of annoying because I really didn't like this book. The Thief by Megan Whalen Turner, which I gave this I think 3 or 3.5 out of 5 stars. This very much also read like an introduction to a larger thing, but it was super easy to read and it did interest me in the world and the continuing story, so I am keeping this, and I am going to hopefully one day I'm so bad at series, but I have the best intentions. Like I would like to continue reading in the series. The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This is a copy that I probably got for like school or something, but I don't think that I ever read this. I don't know if I was supposed to and didn't, or like what the deal is here, but I'm going to unhaul this copy of it. I've never read The Picture of Dorian Gray, but I believe I own like a Barnes & Noble Classic Edition copy. Like there's no reason for me to, this is an ugly copy, so I'm just gonna unhaul it. The Miniaturist by Jessie Burton. This was lent to me by somebody who thought that I should check it out. I mean, maybe it was lent to me, but this person ended up like moving, and we used to work together, and she moved like to California across the country. So I don't know if I'm ever gonna give this back to her, but I also like never read it, but I also don't like want to get rid of it in case she's ever like, hey, remember that book that I gave you? So I'm gonna hold on to it for right now. I'll put it in my TBR pile because, you know, I haven't read it, but I don't know. This is a weird copy. If I Fix You by Abigail Johnson. This was sent to me by the publisher, and I am unhauling it. Next, I have these Penguin English Library copies of classics. I have Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, Jane Eyre, Emma, Northanger Abbey, and Persuasion, which I've read all of these. I have one more. It was over on my TBR cart, but it's North and South, which I haven't read. This is one of those classic collections that I'm hanging on to because it is a collection. I believe there are like more of these, and I would continue to collect these because I think they're really interesting on the shelf. Next, I have Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and I just unhauled like the Picture of Dorian Gray one of the same one, but this is actually the original copy of Jane Eyre that I read in like 9th grade of high school. So I try to reread this, not as often as I do Pride and Prejudice, but I read it once every couple of years, and I'm like emotionally attached because I have vivid memories of like being on my mom's couch reading this book and being like, you know, so like wowed and invested in the story. I love Jane Eyre to bits and pieces, so this is something that is definitely very like emotionally tied for me. 5 out of 5 stars for Jane Eyre, and I'm keeping this. My star ratings throughout these are so like, I'm like telling you star ratings for like half of them. You know, we're doing great. We're doing so good. So this is an illustrated collection of Neil Gaiman works. So I put this on an Amazon wish list, and this was a gift one Christmas from Connor, I think, got me in that year's house salt like gift exchange. So I've read the Graveyard Book, and I've read Coraline. I've never read, fortunately, The Milk, but it's very short, and I'm sure that I could do that very easily. But this was a gift, and it is like a collection, so I'm keeping this. This is a different edition of Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I own multiples, just like Pride and Prejudice and a lot of Austen work ICC. I thought that this was so cool. Like, I don't think it's that cool anymore, especially the font is like not my favorite thing, but you know, a previous version of me thought that this was like the neatest cover, and I'd like to, ooh, that's actually really nice. Cover flaps are really beautiful. So we're going to honor the version of me that really wanted to have this copy of Jane Eyre, and we're keeping this. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. This is the oldest book in my collection, and it is also worn to bits and pieces. I'm entirely sure it was worn when I got it because it's from like 1970 something, and also it's from the library at my big sister's elementary school that she went to. So she brought this home and never returned it, and I commandeered it and read the crap out of this. Like, this was my favorite book when I was growing up, so this is something that I will hold on to forever. I still have really fond memories and like a lot of love for Narnia and the entire Chronicles of Narnia. So yeah, this is, I love having this on my shelf. You know, obviously like having like the newer books and like the ones that are very visually appealing is like part of having a collection, but also all of these like older books that have like sentimental value are really important to me too. So yes. The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis, which I bought after reading a bunch of C.S. Lewis. I actually have not read this one yet, but I am keeping it because I think I would eventually like to make sure that I've read all of C.S. Lewis's work. Emergency Contact by Mary H.K. Choi. I started this and put it aside, and oh look, I have it marked. I made it in 87 pages into this, and I was enjoying it, and I was very inclined to enjoy it. One, because I saw Mary H.K. Choi on a panel, and she's one of those authors or like people that you like see online that you're like, okay, but how can I make her realize that we're meant to be friends? Like that, she's hilarious, and I just feel like we would get along so well. So Mary H.K. Choi, if you're watching this, hit me up. But also, I didn't finish reading your book, so I'm sorry. I do want to get through it because of the way that people talk about this book is very interesting to me, especially after hearing her talk about this book and sort of what she intentioned with it. So this is one that is going on my TBR. A Very Large Expanse of Sea by Tahira Mafi, and I bought this in that Barnes & Noble haul that I talked about about that I just went to Barnes & Noble with a bunch of prompts from you guys and picked up books. And so I have only read Shatter Me by Tahereh Mafi, and that was one of the worst books that I've ever read before in my entire life. This is obviously something that's very different, and I've heard very good things about this, so I'm gonna keep it on my TBR and give this author another shot. Next, Where the Sidewalk Ends and Everything on It by Shel Silverstein. I loved Shel Silverstein as a kid. I think a lot of us did. I remember just absolutely devouring all of his poetry, and I had multiples of his books out from the library at any given time. This is the Barnes & Noble like leather bound edition, and so this should live with my other ones of those that are out on my vertical shelf in the library, but I had it on in my main collection just because white books. I needed white books, and also it's like shaped differently than all the other ones, so it kind of sticks out and fits differently. So anyways, I've read all of these at one point in my life, and I really loved them when I was a kid, and I actually lent this to my niece, and she loved them as well, so I'm holding on to this. Here are those John Scalzi books that I was talking about. So I have Fuzzy Nation, which I loved. I think about this pretty often just because the premise and the main character are really interesting. He's like very self-interested, but he's put in this position where he comes across this like maybe sentient being on this planet, but the fact that that sentient being exists like puts a lot of things into question for him and the company that he works for. And I really liked I usually don't like this sort of character, but I really enjoyed it. And also like the sentient being was so cute, and like it was one of those sci-fi stories. So I really enjoyed this. I think I gave it 4 or 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I hate, you know, mass market paperbacks. I'm one of those people, basic, but yeah, I like this enough that I'm keeping it. And then I have Lock-In by John Scalzi, which I mentioned earlier, so I'm gonna keep this on my TBR and keep this in my collection. Next, I have Fortune's Fresh Start and Colton's Lethal Reunion. These were both sent to me by Harlequin, and they're kind enough to send me some of their romances throughout the year. These are kind of entries into larger collections that are written by different authors as you kind of go along, and both of these were like fun and exactly what I expected them to be. So this one is about a like single mother who gets like a second chance sort of romance, and this one is like a romantic suspense, so they're solving a mystery together but also falling in love. And I love these for just like weekend quick reading, and that sense of like knowing exactly what I'm going to get when I go into them and being completely satisfied at the end. So I'm keeping both of these. Then I have The Seekers by Heather Graham, which is also from the publisher. This is like the most recent in a very long standing book, so I've read I think the first 2 and then this one, so they're books that you can read sort of out of order. This is also like a romantic paranormal thing, so it's about this group of investigators that goes and investigates like when paranormal things are happening, and so it usually ends up being like not a paranormal thing, like just people, but also the paranormal is real in this world, so it's a very interesting balance. And I consider these, like I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars, so you know, again, something that you know what you're going to get, but I consider these sort of like a good bridge or gateway into romance, because these are very much like, they feel more like mystery in sort of that genre, but then also like we pause like once or twice throughout the story just so somebody can get it in. Like that's the kind of romance that this is, which I feel like might be easier for somebody easing their way into romance to be like, oh, there's like a lot of paranormal mystery here with like a little bit of that romance thrown in for somebody who wants to test the waters. So yeah, I'm keeping this. The Austin Playbook by Lucy Parker. I've read 2 out of the 4, I believe, in this series, and I really enjoyed them both, so I'm keeping this. And Crashing Into Her by Mia Sosa, which this cover is like, I always am astounded because it really gives you no sense of what this book is about, but I really love this. I took this on vacation with House Salt when we went to the lake in Wisconsin, and they were making fun of me because I was like so lost when I was like so into this, and I would like bring this everywhere with me. I mean, we were all reading all of the time, but there were multiple times where people were like, Madi, because I was just like so into this. And I really enjoyed this as a romance. I love the main characters and the chemistry between them. It's what put me onto Mia Sosa, so I am keeping both of these. Next I have Remix by Lawrence Lessig, and this is a book that was recommended to me by Nicole. I'm 100% sure like she brought this up in the context of us talking about something, probably like pirating or like intellectual property or something like that. So I got a copy of this, and I feel like I've read bits and pieces of this, or like most of it. I'm not sure if I ever read it cover to cover, but I am keeping this. Soon I Will Be Invincible by Austin Grossman, who is the brother of Lev Grossman, who wrote The Magicians. This is like a superhero story, but it is one where it's like it flips the good guy and bad guy kind of thing, sort of like in Vicious. It really tackles a lot of like cliches and tropes in superhero stories, and it does it very well. So I give this 4 out of 5 stars, and I'm keeping it. Another copy of Coraline by Neil Gaiman, but this is the copy that I actually read from when I read it the first time. I thought it was really dark and cute at the same time. Gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I'm keeping it. Talon by Julie Kagawa, which was sent to me by the publisher, I want to say. I have not read it, but I would like to, so I'm keeping it. The Day Is Ready For You by Allison Maley. Allison actually has been to BookNet Fest a couple of times, and she's just the most wonderful ray of sunshine. If you're not following her on Instagram, I very much recommend it. She shares some of her poetry on Instagram, but she's also just like a really lovely presence, and she's got some adorable kids if you're into that. So I purchased her most recent collection, and I've read some of them, but I have not finished reading this cover to cover, but I am keeping it. Fledgling by Octavia Butler, and this, I love this so much. I've mentioned before how I really enjoy vampire stories, but I only like ever enjoy like, you know, I don't know, like 4 out of 10 that I read, so it's like a very low success rate, but I enjoy the ones that I do enjoy so much that I keep reading vampire stories. And in general, I just really like the different ways that people interpret the lore, and like the exploration specifically of the power dynamics and stuff. So this is really, really interesting for that, because it very purposefully looks at some of these things that we understand to be part of vampire lore in a very interesting way, in a way that is meant to make you uncomfortable and almost question the things that people or like pop culture accepts about these stories about vampires, and you know, not only accepts but like enjoys and champions. So this is absolutely wonderful. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars, and I'm keeping this. Receiver of Many by Rachel Alexander. I read this as I was going through a bunch of Hades and Persephone retellings, and this one was very, very detailed. So my entire thing with Hades and Persephone retellings is that like the very basis of their relationship is kind of like kidnapping and rape, and so this does not necessarily like stray away from that. So I kind of had an issue with that in the beginning. There are some interpretations that just kind of get rid of that entirely, and they make it clear from the beginning, like, no, oh no, like this is not kidnapping and rape. And this one is like, no, it's pretty much kidnapping and rape. But then the way that it continues to deal with that, I guess, like it doesn't make up for, you know, I want to be sensitive here, like it doesn't make up for what happened, but it explores it in a way that I thought was like, okay, fine, at least you acknowledge it, and you're talking about like the impact that it had on her and how they kind of go on from there. And this was such a detailed and like mythology heavy sort of retelling. A lot of retellings tend to like shy away or pull back on the details of the actual like lore itself. And this was very, very rich, and ultimately I enjoyed it for that portion of it, specifically just how rich it was in the overall story and lore. And I really liked this version of Persephone a lot, so I gave this, I think, like 4 out of 5 stars, and I'm keeping this. A Good Idea by Christina Moracho, and I believe this was sent to me by the publisher. I'm unhauling this. A Shadow Bright and Burning by Jessica Cluess, which was a BEA 2016 thing. I have a Fantastic Beast bookmark in here. Like, how do I end up with half of these things? I don't know. I am unhauling both of these. I've got 6 more piles of books to go, so my dream of making this all in one video, you know, that's what it was, a dream. But I'm gonna end this here. I've got 11 books to unhaul this time around, and a bookmark. So these are the ones that I am unhauling. As always, you guys know the drill. I'm asking for all of your feedback down in the comments. You guys have been really great about like not only telling me about your experience with the book, but kind of like guessing according to like my taste what you think I'll think of the book. So it's been really, really helpful. So I appreciate you guys. And yeah, these are the 11. I've got 19 books to add to my TBR, which, you know, as always, I hate that for me. Here's the first batch of them, and here is the second batch of TBR books. Honestly, like, help me get rid of some of these. That leaves 63 other books that I read and enjoyed that are staying in my collection. That chunk had a lot of books that I'd actually read and enjoyed, so I'm getting a little bit nervous now about how many books I actually have left. You know, there are obviously a ton that I haven't read that I've been getting rid of and things of that nature, but yeah, like maybe I underestimated how many I would actually be left with, but we'll see. Only one more of these videos to go, and then I can finish putting everything back on my shelves and show that to you. I'm very excited. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon.